17th Transportation Policy Board meeting to order. I just want to remind you all that this meeting is being held online because the Transportation Policy Board has determined, pursuant to the Governor's executive order on virtual public meetings, that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Middle Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. I do ask if you make a motion or a second that you state your name when you do that, please. Also, if you are going to be voting no, if you could also state your name as well. So we will move into the approval of the minutes. So are there any additions or corrections for the February 17th, 2021 meeting minutes?
Moore moves approval.
Thank you, Mayor Moore. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Ketron on second.
Thank you, Mayor Ketron. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Minutes pass.
You need anything else from me? I got a full day myself, so.
We will now move on to our public comments. If there's anyone here who would like to address our board, if you will come forward and state your name, where you live, and if you are representing an organization, please. Seeing no one, we will move on to our action items, but I do want to let you know if people have comments, you also can email your comments to comments@gnrc.org, and we will be happy to take those. Our first action item today is a resolution for TPB 2021-05, which is amending the fiscal year 2020 through 2023 TIP. We will hold a public hearing after Anna gives us a little bit of information. Anna?
Thank you so much, Mayor Reed, and good morning, everyone. We walked through this package of proposed amendments to the TIP together in our meeting last month. We don't have any changes since we last looked at these. However, I'm going to walk you through them just briefly one more time here. The first proposed amendment comes from TDOT. Was requested by TDOT for the I-65 widening from State Route 25 to State Route 109. They are proposing to add funding to the project. This is funding that will eventually be NHPP funds. However, the state is utilizing advanced construction on this project, so it's currently programmed as state funds. Following that is a request from Metro Nashville for a Charlotte Avenue and Dr. MLK Jr. Boulevard connected transit technology project. This is an award that Metro received from the federal government through the Advanced Transportation and Congestion Management Technologies Deployment Program. So the request is to add the project to the TIP with the awarded funds. Following that is a request from Murfreesboro to add the Veterans Parkway at I-840 interchange lighting project to the TIP. They have received some funding assistance from TDOT for this project and are requesting to add the project to the TIP with those funds and Murfreesboro urbanized area funds. We have a second request from TDOT for another interchange lighting project at Joe B. Jackson Parkway and I-24. This is the same scenario. They've received some funding assistance from TDOT through the interchange lighting program and are requesting to add the project to the TIP with those funds and Murfreesboro urbanized area funds. Following that is a request from Nashville MTA from WEGO for the North Nashville Transit Center project. They are requesting to add state funding to the project that is Improve Act funding that they were granted for this project. And then last, we have a request from RTA for a regional park and ride facility project. They are requesting to add the project to the TIP with FTA 5307 CARES Act funds that they received through the relief funding package. And that concludes our walkthrough of those 6 proposed amendments. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take those before turning it back over to Mayor Reed. All right, Mayor Reed, doesn't sound like anyone has any.
Great, thanks, Anna. We do need to hold a public hearing prior to our vote. So is there anyone here who would like to speak for or against this item? Seeing no one, I will close this hearing and ask for a motion to adopt Resolution TPB 2021-05, which amends the fiscal year 2020 through 2023 Transportation Improvement Program. Do I have a motion?
Move for approval, Billy Vogel.
Moore,
Thank you, Mayor.
seconds.
Thank you, Mayor Vogel. Thank you, Mayor Moore. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. We are now going to move on to our election of our Transportation Policy Board officers for April through the end of 2021. And I think Paige Brown is going to talk to us on behalf of the nominating committee. Paige?
I am, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of the nominating committee, which includes myself, Mayors Hutto and Moore, we are submitting this slate of nominees for Chairman, Robertson County Mayor Billy Vogel, and for Vice Chair, Columbia Mayor Chaz Mulder.
Great, thanks, Mayor Brown. I'm going to do these separately so we can vote on them individually. So first thing we're going to do is for Chair. So at this time, I'm going to open the floor for nominations in addition to Robertson County Mayor Billy Vogel that was nominated by our nominating committee. Are there any nominations from the floor?
I'd make a nomination for Mayor Vogel.
And I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for Mayor Vogel. Are there any other nominations? Then I will cease nominations, and since we only had one nominee, all in favor of Mayor Vogel say aye.
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 Any opposed?
It's just all the staff, county mayors and city mayors.
Then congratulations, Mayor Vogel. We'll now move on to our vice chair, and I will open the floor for nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Chaz Mulder. This is
Second,
Moore.
Anthony Holt.
Any other nominations? Seeing no other nominations, I will close the floor for nominations, and only having one nominee of Chaz Mulder from the city of Columbia. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, Chaz and Billy. I know that you all are going to do a great job, and they will start their duties next month. So congratulations. We now have a couple of informational items. Our first one is on Amtrak and the potential for future passenger service. I think this is something we're all excited to hear about, the possibilities, and I'm going to turn it over to Sean to talk a little bit about it and then to introduce our speakers. Sean?
Thank you, Mayor Reed. I think some of you may recall around this time last year, there was some press about Amtrak looking into expanding service within the South and the Middle Tennessee area. And unfortunately, we didn't have an opportunity to, I think we were trying to schedule that presentation at last March, but there's a couple things that got in the way, like a tornado and the pandemic. But we're pleased that we can get this presentation rescheduled and bring it to you all. We have Todd and Mariah here today from Amtrak to discuss some of the possibilities and process for exploring new service within Nashville and Middle Tennessee. And so with that, I will turn it over and pull up their slides.
Good morning. I'll start, and my colleague Mariah Morales is on with us as well. This is Todd Stennis with Amtrak's Government Affairs Department out of New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm responsible for all of Amtrak's state and local government affairs work throughout the Southeast, from Texas to Virginia. And that's just a brief overview of me, and I'll turn it over to my colleague Mariah Morales for just a moment.
Well, good morning. Thanks everyone for including us in today's agenda. I am Mariah, and I'm out here in Washington, D.C., even though I look like I'm at Portland's Union Station in my home station in Oregon. I've been in Nashville a few times, and I was just looking through all my photos, trying to at least get a picture of the Music City Star, which I've been on, but I couldn't find the photo. So next time I'll make sure that's there. But it's really a joy to be with you all today and excited to talk about the possibilities ahead.
Thanks, Mariah. We're going to just give you a brief overview of Amtrak, where we are today, what our origins are, where we are today, and where we want to go tomorrow. So, Sean, if you could, you've got control of the deck here, so I'm going to just ask you to flip to the next slide. So, just a brief history and overview, as I stated, in the 1950s and 60s, with transportation shifting more towards the highways and towards air. The passenger service that existed by all of the rail carriers in the country was seeing a decline, and a steady decline that took place into the 1960s. And so most of the railroads went to Congress looking for an answer, and that answer was the creation of Amtrak. Amtrak started service on May 1, 1971, and over the last 50 years, we will be celebrating our 50th anniversary this coming May. We have grown our service to the point that we're running 300 daily weekday trains. We run over a network of 21,000 miles. We serve 46 states. The only states we don't serve in the lower 48 are Wyoming and South Dakota. And we have approximately 16,000 employees. Next slide. So just a backdrop of how Amtrak actually works. When the railroads came to Congress looking for that relief on passenger rail service, the agreements that they entered into created what is known as the Rail Passenger Service Act of 1970. And in so doing, it allowed Amtrak access to every railroad in the United States. So there's not a place of where Amtrak's limited to where they can and can't go. The agreement stated that Amtrak has those rights to go to any of the host carriers, whether they actually have passenger service on the route then and or now. So if you have a route today, for example, that doesn't have service, we can still have access to that particular right of way. Next slide. So just a few myths about Amtrak. By federal law, Amtrak, again, is granted access to the entire national network, and that includes host railroad facilities as well. All the way down to that access, again, as I stated earlier, is not limited to where we have routes running today. We can grow into new routes and new route structures. Next slide. So as everyone knows, we've all experienced the reactions to what we do with COVID over the last year, and Amtrak was no exception to that rule. We were hit very hard as well. In fact, this past fall, we made the decision that we would cut our services back, our daily service, particularly in long distance and state-supported services, back to tri-weekly in many instances. So thankfully, we're moving out of that stage. And this summer, we intend on having all of our long-distance trains restored to daily service that were previously operated as daily service trains. There's only 2 that are not by early June. We're also working with the states right now to restore their services to the previous service levels that they were enjoying as well. And we're bringing back furloughed employees. And in conjunction with that, we're also seeking additional support and funding and policy changes from Congress to improve and expand service, which is something that we want to obviously share with you today. Next slide. So this is just an overview of what Amtrak's route structure looks like today. And what you'd find about it is, for the most part, it's really gone unchanged in most instances throughout the last 50 years. There's a couple of routes that are new and a couple that are no longer there that were in the beginning or in some of the mid-decades, if I may. But for the most part, the route structure looks the same. Let's drill into Tennessee just a little bit and look at what you have in Tennessee. It's been pretty consistent since 1979 in that we only serve West Tennessee with our City of New Orleans service through Memphis and through Dyersburg, and that's the daily service operating between New Orleans and Chicago. Next slide. So in recent decades, we have shifted more towards a state-supported model and not so much getting away from long distance, but amending long distance to include additional frequencies on top of many long distance routes that are on shorter distant routes. Less than 750 miles is really what the target route is. So today we have 17 state partners that we partner with, and in some of those instances, the states actually have joint powers authorities or other agencies that we work through for those partnerships. For example, California is one of those states where we work through JPAs to operate the services in their state. The most attractive routes are generally less than 500 miles, and Section 209 of the PREA legislation has really shaped our state partnerships and how those function in the current environment. Section 209 came out of the 2008 Rail Safety Act that President Bush signed into law just prior to leaving office. And since we've done that, we have seen a significant growth in ridership over the last 20 plus years. And with that being said, there's an extreme amount of growth opportunity that's out there today, and there are corridors that are really untapped in today's market, and that's where we really want to try to go tomorrow, with Tennessee being one of those places. Next slide. So as we prepare for the future, we've got to look at what are the changing demographics. We look at how the population is changing in this country. In the next 30 years, we're looking at a population of around 389 million, up from 325 million just a year or so ago. The millennials and immigrants are critical to the nation's changing demographics, and they are critical to Amtrak's growth strategy as well. We think that obviously the 400-mile corridor is that ideal market, if I may, because when you start to get longer than that, significantly longer than that, it just becomes more challenging to operate and to manage. Next slide. So when we look specifically at Tennessee, you say, okay, what are our opportunities in Tennessee? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we obviously have our service on the western side of the state, and we've actually had discussions with members of your state delegation about potential service expansion over the Canadian National route to Memphis, because we run a state-supported service today of multiple frequencies between Chicago and Carbondale, Illinois. But obviously, there's other elements that we want to serve. We haven't served Nashville since 1979, when we operated a train called the Floridian that ran from Chicago to Florida. So today we're looking again at that market of less than 400 miles. So what is the most beneficial, and how can we serve Nashville and the greater Nashville area? We think the ideal route is the route from Nashville to Chattanooga to Atlanta. Next slide. Specifically, this would be the route, and these are the potential stops that we would have along the route. And we think over the course of the next 15 years that we have the opportunity, if we can initiate this service, to serve as many as 125,000 passengers a year. And that's a strong market for a route of 400 miles, and it's consistent with what we're doing in other parts of the country. You would also, in conjunction with that, not only have these station stops, but you would have dedicated airport stops in Chattanooga and Nashville. Next slide. This is a draft schedule. So when you look at the schedule, don't think this is set in stone by any stretch of the imagination, but this is something that we've looked at as what we feel we could make work. Obviously, it would be tweaked and modified accordingly once we were able to actually have discussions with the host carriers and work out what the schedule would actually look like. But this is a hypothetical schedule of what we could do with 2 daily round trips. You're looking at service, and when you read down on the left-hand side, originating out of Nashville at 6:25 in the morning and 2:50 in the afternoon, respectively, getting into Atlanta at 1:55 and 10:20, and then coming out of Atlanta in the morning at 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. So you'd have morning and evening departures out of both locations. And this is something that we're pursuing in different parts of the country as well, and we're actually already operating in some of those 17 state partners that I mentioned earlier. Next slide. So I want to turn the remainder of the deck over to my colleague Mariah Morales and let her tell you a little bit more about what's happening on the federal level and what we hope to do to work with you all on implementing service in the state of Tennessee and expanding our national network. Mariah?
Great, thanks. Well, I think like the last 2 or 3 years when we used to leave our houses, Todd and I and others from his team spent quite a bit of time traveling with, throughout the South. And really, if you look at it, we should have included this map. If you look at sort of the map of where service is today, there's obviously a lot of opportunity that we see for places that have one or fewer frequencies of long distance trains or no service at all, particularly in the West and all throughout the South and Southeast. There's just a lot of population shifts, as we mentioned, the millennials and obviously immigrant communities. And I was thinking the Zoomers, right? I think that's what we're calling the next generation of folks that are, I think, doing a lot of advocacy right now for really wanting to have better and more accessible train service across the country. So there really is nothing, it seems like, but a lot of interest and demand from communities like yours. And I would say, and Todd, you have to hear this all the time too. The one thing we heard is like, there's just not the resource financially, and sometimes the public policy isn't there to really grow these services in new corridors. And so I think that sat with us quite a bit over the last couple of years. And so what we've been trying to work with communities like you and our existing state partners to figure out is, what is the best thing that the federal government can do? And I think, like, to state the obvious, we need a lot of capital investment to help, particularly new corridors like yours, really get off the ground. So I think that's something we really want to talk to you about today. But I think to really get into this idea of growing and investing in corridors, it's important to sort of set the stage of what currently exists as far as funding opportunities for new services or existing services. So, as it stands today within the FAST Act, there's really an authorizing bill for Amtrak, and then there's an annual appropriations bill. So as part of the authorizing or the policy document for Amtrak, there are a few grant programs in particular that we've listed here. There's Consolidated Rail and Infrastructure Safety Improvements, otherwise known as CRISI grants. There's Restoration and Enhancement grants, and that was really a kind of a toe in the water on providing new corridors some level of capital funding to get them started. And I think what we've learned from what we call the REG program, or the Restoration and Enhancement Grant Program, is it just needs to be bigger, more robust, and really have, this particular program was designed for services that currently or have had previous service. This would be a version of that. We'd really want to put that on steroids to grow corridor services like we're talking about today for Tennessee. And then there's the Fed State Partnership, State of Good Repair grant program that also tends to be tapped quite a bit for rail. But then there are a few others. Build or Tiger has been used for rail investment, and then there are a few other programs that can touch on rail. But what we really began to understand is these grant programs are critical, and we 100% support putting significant funding into those grant programs. But the reality is that, as we do today at Amtrak, we have a national network grant that we use to help states grow and support service today. That really what we need to do is have a program that's part of our national network grant at Amtrak to try and really create a funding mechanism that would, one, get the capital, 100% capital investment for communities like yours to do whatever infrastructure investments we need to make to start up a service, and then to provide operating support as services really get up and running. Because as Todd said, I think the projection you said was 125,000 ridership. I mean, that's not the first day, and we know that. So we know that states and new corridors in particular, it's very difficult for states to get in the game if they don't have a sense of security as they build up toward their, whatever projected riderships are expected for a particular corridor. So, you know, what we have today that's available to us, you know, these have been really useful tools, particularly to incrementally grow service, but to really do the kind of new corridor service that we want to, you know, make available to states like yours. We know that we need a program that has significant capital and operating investment to get those off the ground. So actually, why don't we move to the next slide, because I think timelines when you're not living here in Washington get a little confusing. So it's like, well, when do we do this? When's the ask? Where does this money come from, and who do you go to make sure things get moving in the right direction? So I thought that'd be helpful to sort of let you know where we are today. So in the federal legislative environment, like I said, we have an authorizing bill and we have an appropriations bill. So for all surface modes that include Amtrak these days, so transit, highways, they're all part of what was called the FAST Act, and that has it expired last year. The Surface Transportation Authorization expired, but that was then extended for another year. So that means in this year ahead, Congress will be revisiting some of these policy and funding guidelines that would be part of the next version of a surface transportation reauthorization. And many of you may have heard last year the Senate considered on a couple of committees some reauthorization principles. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, you know, put together their bill, and that was actually quite successful. I bring those up because particularly on the House side, there is just tremendous enthusiasm for growing service, for investing in, you know, good, higher performance regional corridor service like Amtrak is doing in many places in the Midwest and California, Pacific Northwest, things that are maybe not on the high-speed rail end of the spectrum, but that are able to operate in shared corridors like you have. Congress is really signaling a lot of support for those sorts of investments. And so I think as we turn to the next version of our surface reauthorization with this new Congress, where I think now, as you all know, the Senate and the Senate and the House majorities are, you know, on record as saying they really want to do big things. They really want to grow and sort of innovate in transportation. And among their list of priorities is, you know, more Amtrak service to more places in the country. And I also think it's worth mentioning, you know, I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that the president has long been an Amtrak supporter. So I think, you know, there's just a lot of positive energy for making real investments kind of for the first time in, you know, really a long time in the kind of corridor service that we think could really benefit communities like yours. And the other thing I always like to mention is the new Secretary of Transportation is an Amtrak mayor. And I think his sense, he today has really long distance service that served kind of the north and south ends of his city, which is South Bend. But he understands, you know, communities that have started with long distance service and sort of what it means to communities to grow into corridor service over time. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. So what's ahead? Well, you know, we are coming through a crisis, obviously the COVID crisis, and we've had a number of funding bills that have given us, you know, the ability to, you know, make it through the crisis and then actually continue making investments. So we had, I think you've all heard the CARES Act. There was some emergency aid in December, and then the recent American Rescue Plan. And I think for folks in this room, it's worth noting that each of these bills provide us, I think, a window into what Congress is thinking. They are not just interested in sort of Band-Aid for where we are today, but many of these resources are really going to be invested in making important capital investments that we already have on deck for, you know, ADA, accessibility, stations, you know, infrastructure work that we have that's ongoing. And then, you know, for us to make big shifts, I think, in American intercity rail through fleet acquisition. So Congress has said over the last several months, we know there's a crisis, but we're still committed to helping you all grow beyond recovery and into a brighter future. So I think these are things to be optimistic about. So what's ahead? Well, I think we've all heard a lot of conversation about an infrastructure bill, a stimulus bill. We think that's a great opportunity for Congress to hear from communities about the importance of making sure that there's money for Amtrak to grow new corridors. Surface reauthorization, as I mentioned, that could be in the year ahead, or we could see another extension of the current service bill. But that is where you would see big policy changes for not just the funding issues we have, but as Todd kicked off this conversation, we have access and on-time performance or reliability goals too that we want to address in a future bill. And then the one funding opportunity we know is ahead of us is for Amtrak. Each year, our appropriation cycle is annual. So that is one place where we know that Congress will be considering what investments to make, and so we could see, a combination or some version of stimulus and our FY22 appropriation cycle bring about some, if not many, of the needs that we have especially on the funding side for things like corridors. Let's go to the next slide. Let's see, what am I doing on time? Okay. Just wanted to make sure for the group that you were aware of, just the suite of priorities that we have as we, at the federal level, communicate about the importance of intercity rail, ADA safety, accessibility, higher speed and high-speed rail. There's a number of safety improvements we need. And actually, what I should add to this too is, top of mind for us is the demand for better mobility, connectivity, multimodal connections to, I know when I was in Nashville, making sure that where we serve downtown communities, we're connecting to the local transit environments and trying to really make links between intercity service and thriving downtown, community networks that are alternative transportations to just everybody having to drive. So let's go on. Next slide. Sorry. And I think we've really touched on these. There's a number of priorities for reauthorization. Obviously, funding is just critical to get new corridors going. We are looking at working with Congress, members of Congress, on a rail passenger trust fund. Unlike every other surface transportation mode, passenger rail does not have a trust fund, which means that each year we go to Congress, request money. And obviously, just like running any business, that's not ideal. It's just very hard to do a lot of future planning when you're on an annual request cycle. So even, transit usually has a multi-year authorization and appropriation cycle. And we'd like to be like, have the similar benefits that transit and highways have. Access, on-time trains, and then this corridor growth program. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Great. So, we're here with you, and I always like to include this slide, and I think we're going to have a few minutes for questions and conversation after this. But, really, nothing happens if Congress doesn't hear from communities like yourselves that this stuff matters, right? There are a lot of competing needs, and I recognize, especially in the current environment, we've all just sort of are just getting to the other side of some very difficult weeks, months, a year, right? It was like St. Patrick's Day last year that I think really things began to dramatically change. So there's just a lot that Congress needs to make decisions about. But we think, and we hope it seems to us that many communities like you really believe that this can be a big part of the future of transportation, and growing corridor service is part of that. So your members, need to hear that that's important to you, and we want to make sure that we continue to work with your, state and local leadership to ensure that what we suggest to Congress really reflects the needs of your community. So we are so grateful for the chance to sit down and talk with all of you, and hopefully next time in person. But I know that we have a few more minutes left in the meeting, so let us know if you have any questions or if there's anything else we can do.
Yeah, thanks, Mariah. And one other thing, if I could, we, in addition to everything that Mariah and I have shared with you this morning, we continue to stay engaged with the state delegation in regards to this proposal. We've had conversations with you all and with the delegation, and we also did a presentation last year. Our colleague Ray Lang came in and did a presentation before the legislature last year prior to the pandemic. So when that occurred, obviously, it just kind of put things on hold, like so many other things for the last year. But we want to continue to maintain those relationships. We've also had conversations with mayors and city managers along the route between Atlanta, Chattanooga, and Nashville, just giving a brief overview of what this proposal is, essentially what we've been sharing with you today. So at this time, if there's any questions, Mariah and I'll be more than happy to answer anything we can for you. Don't be bashful.
Sean, anything else you'd like to add?
No, unless there's any questions or comments, we appreciate the presentation, Todd and Mariah. That's this is it's good to kind of zoom out beyond the regional scope sometimes and get the bigger picture of what's going on and potential opportunities.
Well, we certainly appreciate the opportunity, and frankly, at this point, while we're in the infant stages here, I can tell you that the next step for us is really that expression of support from the local communities to the state and federal delegation. If this is something that you all are really interested in pursuing, now is the time to get that messaging out to the state and federal delegates in the sense of resolutions of support, letters of support, things of that nature. That's how this gets started. And that's how the support grows and swells into what will lead to the implementation of service. And obviously there's a lot of steps along the way, and as I say again, we're in the infant stages of it, but we certainly want to do everything we can to assist you all going forward. So if you have any questions going forward, do not hesitate to reach out to Mariah or myself. We'll be happy to help you in any way we can. And as Mariah stated earlier, hopefully the next time we get together, we can all do that in person. And we thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. The last slide does have our email information if you want to advance that real quick in case anyone wants to write that down. Perfect. Great.
Thanks so much, Todd and Mariah. The rail for the town of Smyrna is such a huge part. That's actually how our community was founded. And so we are really excited about this possibility. So we look forward to working with you guys in the future.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
We will now move on to our second action informational item, which is call for studies and planning activities for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. And Sean, I think you're taking this.
Great, thank you, Mayor Reed. So to switch gears a little bit, I'm going to talk about the upcoming development of our transportation work program. Often referred to as the Unified Planning Work Program. I'm just going to cover some of the components involved in developing that upcoming work program that will cover the next two federal fiscal years, federal fiscal year 22 and 23. And so the work program kind of serves a dual purpose. One of those is to coordinate planning across the region to inform and align kind of the policies, plans, and programs. This helps staff as well as members of TCC and the Transportation Policy Board be aware of other efforts within the region, and is an opportunity to kind of leverage those local, regional, as well as state activities that are underway or planned for the near term. And then it's also an opportunity to program the federal planning dollars and prioritize that funding to planning work to support goals for the region, and a lot of those goals that we've identified recently through the update of the Regional Transportation Plan. The existing planning work program you can find on our website, gnrc.org/UPWP. In that page, it contains information on some of the current studies, such as South Corridor, Downtown Interloop, and others, and as well as some of the completed plans and studies, over the past 5 to 10 years. As we identified last month, as we wrapped up the Regional Transportation Plan update, we did emphasize that there was more work to do. We needed more collaboration, more innovation, more revenue in order to solve a lot of the issues that we identified and that we face as a region. And I think the work program becomes a great opportunity and a great vehicle to kind of brainstorm and strategize how we're going to address these issues, and what type of outreach and engagement, data analysis, or studies are necessary in order to do that. And so on a typical year, we have about $3 million available for planning work within the region, and it comes across 3 main funding sources. One being the FHWA Metropolitan Planning, or PL funds, that come to MPOs across the country for planning related activities. Another is the FTA Metropolitan Planning, the F5303 funds, designated for multimodal planning activities in the metropolitan area. And then the third being the FHWA State Planning and Research funds, which is another source of federal funds that are allocated through the State Planning and Research Program. And typically the breakdown traditionally has been 80% on the federal side, and then largely that being matched by either state match or local dues, and that's been the traditional breakdown. There's a shift in the upcoming years to shift that split more to an 85-15 breakdown, at least on the consolidated planning grant, the CPG grant. And then as we kind of look at how that breaks out, where that money goes in terms of annual expenditures, a lot of that money is dedicated to, a significant portion, nearly 90%, is dedicated to staffing, other direct costs, and indirect agency costs. There's also a portion available for consulting services, typically on an average of about 11% here of that. And in the approach to how we kind of determine, MPOs across the country have varying approaches to how they utilize consultants. I think for us, the traditional approach has been to keep a lot of the core functions and work to carry out the planning activities within the region in-house, through a lot of the plan and tip programming, a lot of the data and analysis work, modeling and forecasting, and then to kind of rely more on consultants for some of the larger scale studies or corridor planning efforts, or things like large data collection efforts that are kind of more sporadic and don't occur on an annual basis. And just looking through a couple of the examples of some of the activities that we are currently engaged with that we're hoping to conclude by the end of this fiscal year. The regional ITS architecture, smart mobility assessment, as well as the downtown interstate loop and South Corridor that I mentioned earlier. Also looking to kick off efforts related to the regional traffic shed and impact fee study, as well as to get more involved in the freight within the region. And then some reoccurring activities that we've done on an annual basis relate to the vital signs report that we've worked in tandem with the Chamber of Commerce on, that reports a number of metrics across the region and other efforts such as public relations and data collection and modeling updates. We are looking for input. We shared a survey with the Transportation Coordinating Committee earlier in the month, and we're kind of looking for input on two separate items. One is information on local and sub-regional studies that you all are engaged, currently underway or have planned for the upcoming years, so that we can be aware of those and make sure that that information is captured within the work program. We're also looking to what are some potential regional priorities that you have in mind over the next 2 years that staff or consultants could be engaged in conducting. And so you can provide that feedback through the survey, gnrc.org/survey/UPWP. We'll keep that link, that survey open over the next week. So if you can encourage your staff to complete that. We have received some good input so far. We've not only asked people to weigh in on those planning activities, but also on, what are some of the priority issues that they see within the region. And here's some of the initial results so far as, high priority for issues, including the rise in serious injuries and fatalities, the worsening traffic congestion, limited funding and financing options, and rising costs of the obesity epidemic. And so we continue to monitor these, and as we get more responses, we'll continue to update this and bring this information back to you. In addition to some of the local and local and sub-regional planning activities that we've received and regional requests, the state has also provided some priorities that they would like to see considered as part of this update cycle, including alternative fuels, project delivery, and virtual public involvement. And so this month we're kicking things off and looking for input from you all on these studies and planning activities to engage on over the next 2 years. And then kind of as we work through the schedule, we're going to continue to review your input, discuss these priorities as we develop a draft work program. And the goal is to adopt a updated transportation planning work program by August in order to be ready to start carrying that out over the next federal fiscal year come September 1 or October 1. So with that, that concludes my remarks, but happy to take any questions or comments. And I see that Michael just dropped the in the chat box for folks to be able to access that. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sean. What do we as board members need to do? We need to make sure that we complete the survey that Michael just shared. And Sean, if you don't mind emailing that out as well for those that might just be on by phone, that would be great. And they're asking that we have that completed by next Wednesday, which is March the 24th. Okay, we will move on to informational item number C, which is an update on the status of the transportation improvements. And Anna, I think you're going to take this one.
Yes, that's right. Thanks again, Mayor Reed. We just wanted to make everyone aware that we spoke with TCC earlier this month about updating the project tracker that we maintain. This is for projects that are currently programmed in the TIP and contain funding sources that we're interested in making sure that we're following along and making sure those projects are advancing. and that we're kind of aware of everything stands. So we've received a pretty good amount of responses from TCC members just giving us updates on where these projects stand. We'll certainly welcome any comments that any of you may have on any of these projects as well. I'm sure Sean will send a copy of the most up-to-date version of this tracker with the recap email that you typically receive following this meeting. So we'll move along. So we briefly mentioned last month that the state's use of a funding mechanism called advanced construction in relation to both our development of the RTP and the now adopted TIP amendment for the I-65 widening project. And we wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive into explaining exactly what this is and why it's something we're interested in as we consider funding priorities for our region. So what happens here is that the state advances a project with state funding while having an advanced authorization agreement in place with a federal agency that the eventual intent is to pay for the project with federal funds. And then when the project is complete, it's audited by the federal agency. And if all proper rules and regulations were seen to have been followed during the project's development, then that project can then be reimbursed with federal funds. So while this does allow a project to progress on a somewhat accelerated schedule because the per phase authorization process for federal funding can be bypassed and the implementing agency, which in this case would be the state, can plan to use future fiscal year allocations of federal funding that may not be available now to ultimately pay for the project at the end of completion. Sean, you want to go ahead and flip slides? So we just outlined some examples of state-sponsored projects that are currently programmed in the TIP that are utilizing this advanced construction funding mechanism. There's 5 projects listed here. You'll see that the I-65 widening project that we just approved the TIP amendment for is listed here. When we went over the TIP amendment, we discussed how it was going to utilize state funds on the front end, and then when the project closes out, their future intent is to use NHPP funds. So that's kind of just an example of a particular project you guys have seen recently that's utilizing this mechanism. But let's move on to the next slide, Sean. So what we're looking at here is a snapshot of the split of federal, state, and local funding as programmed in our current TIP as it was originally adopted. So you can take note here that the federal funds programmed at this time accounted for about 69% of all program funds. And then Sean, go ahead and flip to the next slide. This slide is depicting these same 3 categories of program funds, but as you can see, the federal amount programmed has shrunk to about 50% of all funds, while the state amount has increased from only 9% on the previous slide to 33% on this slide. In dollar amount, state funds programmed have increased by $327.4 million, with about $267.8 million of that identified as funding currently committed on advanced construction projects that will later utilize federal funding. So the use of advanced construction as a funding mechanism, coupled with the massive cost increases that we've seen across the board for the past few years, and particularly on these really large state implemented projects, is making it somewhat difficult for our region to get a clear picture of exactly what the state's plan is for federal funding use in future years. So this is just something that we're interested in engaging with TDOT on so that we can best facilitate the communication of project priorities in our region. And that concludes updates on things that are currently going on with the TIP. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. If we don't have any questions, I'll pass back off to Sean.
Sean, anything else to add to that?
No, I think the next topic is still tip related, but it has more to do with the use of the COVID relief funds, and so I can jump into that if there's no additional questions.
I don't have a question. I just think that's another thing that highlights the need for us as a board and staff to continue to have dialogue with TDOT so we can know exactly about funding and how much funding there is and what they're going to be using in projects. So I think it's just another indication of needing more communication. So I look forward to for us to be able to do that in the future in regards to projects. But Sean, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you about the $7.9 million in transportation highway funds from our coronavirus response and relief act that the 7-county Nashville metropolitan planning area will be receiving. So I'm going to let you take that.
Thank you, Mayor Reed. So I think at the previous last two meetings, we've touched on this, kind of the amount of funding that has been suballocated to the Nashville metropolitan area, that 7.9 million amount. And so today we'll try and get to the next step, which is start to think through some potential ways to prioritize that funding. So as you mentioned, the relief funding included funding to address COVID-19 impacts related to the highway infrastructure program. The eligibility for the funding is pretty broad, very similar to the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, STBG. One thing that was fairly unique is the no federal match required, which would be different than the typical 20% match on the federal funds. And I think kind of two ways to, or two different buckets that the funding came through. We've talked a lot about the 7.9 million. There was also a supplemental allocation of highway infrastructure program funds suballocated to our region in the amount of 1.15 million. And so that's on top of the 7.9. And I think speaking about the highway infrastructure program in the context of some of the previous allocations of that funding that we've got, I'll talk through that first. And so the highway infrastructure program, we've received allocations since 2018 for this, and it totals about, with the latest 1.15 million, it totals about 10.85 million in federal dollars. Typically has been a 20% match and has been tied to a fairly quick turnaround for the obligation deadlines. I think a 3-year window for each of those. And so as you can see, kind of the way that we've summarized this table is of that amount that's available, kind of a status update on how much of that has been programmed and then how much of that funding has been obligated based on those annual amounts. And so as you can see, we've only programmed about 4.44 million of that 10.85. And then there's still about 6.4 million available to be programmed on projects in the region. And the way that, if you recall, back in May, we had indicated kind of a way to prioritize this HIP funding, directing it to projects in the existing TIP projects with cost overruns. And so at that May 2020 meeting, the TBB adopted a resolution to guide that HIP funds to existing TIP projects with needs for either right-of-way or construction, cost overruns. And so there's still a significant share of that funding available, that 6.4 million kind of available to projects with existing right-of-way or construction cost overruns. And so in addition to that HIP funding, and we'll kind of switch over to that 7.9 million now, we also have this COVID relief funds, the CRRSSA COVID relief funds, and so this is about nearly $10 billion nationwide, with about 210 million of that funding coming to the state of Tennessee, and then nearly 8 million of that's allocated to the Nashville metropolitan area. And as I mentioned, this is no required match on these funds, and a fairly quick obligation deadline of September 30th, 2024. And so, in addition to, and we'll talk about on the next slide about some potential ways to spend that 7.9 million. I will just mention that in addition to the funding that's being suballocated to our region, there's also nearly $190 million available to TDOT for priorities statewide, and so there's also other funding out there that will be going to projects, some in our region, some in other regions, at the discretion of TDOT. And so, in terms of a recommended approach, kind of the way that we thought through this is projects types that would be more suitable for this funding, and then projects that would be less suitable. And so in the column of more suitable, we identified a number of, I guess with the guidance of lower cost projects that could be implemented rather quickly given the obligation deadlines. And so you'll see through that list a number of spot safety improvements, transportation technology upgrades, placemaking enhancement or sidewalk connectivity and pedestrian improvement opportunities, big data or software tool acquisition, transit improvements, such as fare system upgrades, bus stop enhancements, and transit access improvements, were kind of put into the category of more suitable. In the category for less suitable, this is where we identified complex projects that are still early in the project development process, being a little bit more challenging, given that they typically take longer to make it through the project development process, tend to be a little bit more complex, and also tend to cost more. And so, and also given that the balance of HIP funding that is still available and has not been programmed, there is still an opportunity for some existing TIP projects to, if they have cost overruns for right-of-way or construction, to access that money for overruns already. And so we have put together a similar survey to help get some impact or some feedback on what these, how the relief funds should be prioritized. I think some of the initial feedback that we've received so far is that there's a higher priority projects include the sidewalk connectivity, pedestrian improvements, transit and technology upgrades, roadway safety improvements, as well as ADA related improvements. And so we'll, similar to the UPWP survey, we'll continue to keep this survey open over the next week. Please take an opportunity to weigh in and provide your input, and then we can use that feedback to help guide the next steps in prioritizing this relief funding. So with that, I will open it up and see if there's any questions or comments.
Okay. Thanks, Sean. And we just ask that if you all can help provide your input by completing the survey that was shared by this coming Wednesday. And that is a different survey than the one that we put up before. So 2 different surveys that we need you to complete.
Mary, this is Michael. It looks like Preston Elliott.
Oh. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mayor Reed and board members. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to just kind of add a little bit of information here, Sean. Thank you for covering the various aspects of the CRISA funds here. I know that we provided a letter to you all on the MPO funds. As I think most of you are aware, the bill specifically called out the larger MPOs over 200,000 in population receiving a specific allocation, and that's the 7.9 million that Sean was referring to. As a department, when we looked at the bill, we felt as an agency it was appropriate that we should provide funding from these backstop funds to the smaller MPOs. So a similar letter went out in which about 4.2 million was identified for the smaller MPOs. And an oversight on our part was, obviously, as you're aware, you have a second urbanized area, Murfreesboro, within the Nashville MPO area. So a letter, hopefully today, will be going out, which identifies roughly about $774,171. That would be the Murfreesboro urbanized area allocation. I just wanted to make that point aware.
Great, thanks, Preston. Sean, anything else you want to add before we move on?
No, I appreciate the update, Preston, and so we can continue to update our information, make sure you guys have the full.
And one more point. I'm sorry. So unlike what is identified in the bill for the CRISA funds in terms of a timeline, because of the smaller MPOs, we have actually established a date that's a little shorter. That's because these particular funds are statewide, and so we want to have enough time to be able to move them if we need to. We're hoping that would not be the case, but so for the obligation deadline for the funds will be December 31, 2022. Again, just for the Murfreesboro portion. I don't think, based on what you've laid out here, Sean, as a schedule and the direction you're going, that'll be a problem. But I just wanted to point that out.
Great, thanks, Preston. We will now move on to our regular reports. And first is FHWA. I'm not sure, Pam, are you taking this today?
Hey, Mary, this is Sean Santai. Actually, I'll be providing the update. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. First, just a few items here. First, I just wanted to congratulate Mayor Vogel and Mayor Mulder on your elections to the TPB leadership. Looking forward to working with you guys. But Mayor Reed, I did want to thank you for your time and service to the MPO here. We have really appreciated your dedication, your leadership, your passion for this planning process. So just wanted to say thank you. I know it's not goodbye. We'll continue working with you, but just wanted to thank you for that. A few things at the national level, as everyone on the board is likely aware, the president did sign another COVID relief bill this month. We've not received any official guidance through FHWA channels, but based on the analyses that we've seen from AASHTO and other industry sources, it does not look like the bill included any funding for FHWA programs. It does include funding for other surface transportation sectors like transit and rail, as was alluded to by Ms. Morales earlier. So we'll be sure to share any guidance if it becomes available on any impacts to the highway programs. We just heard about the CRISA highway infrastructure funding program funding, so just wanted to mention that we did issue a guidance memorandum associated with that funding. We've shared that with the GNRC staff, and we don't generally issue guidance memos specific to federal funding programs, but given the flexible nature of the funding and some of the unique characteristics of it, we did decide to do that for this particular funding. So again, we shared that with the GNRC staff. And they should be able to assist with disseminating that, and we're here to address any other questions. I'll just quickly say I'm sorry if you guys hear my dog panting in the background. She panics at the first rumble of thunder. The US DOT has issued a notice of funding opportunity for our fiscal year 21 Infrastructure for Rebuilding America Infra Grant Program. This is a discretionary grant program administered by US DOT. Total funding anticipated to be available through that program is about $889 million. And with the new administration, new project criteria include climate change and environmental justice and racial equity and reducing barriers to opportunity. So they'll be looking for infrastructure projects that address some of those new criteria. We have also shared that notice of funding opportunity link with the GNRC staff. The deadline for application for that is March 19th, this Friday. So just wanted to make sure to get that final plug in there for that. And then the last point we wanted to make, just wanted to notify the board that following last month's adoption of the long-range plan, including the update to the congestion management process, FHWA and FTA did issue a letter to the GNRC closing out the final corrective action from the 2018 Federal Certification Review. We had asked for an update to the congestion management process, and we worked with GNRC staff and with TDOT on working through that update as a part of the update to the long range plan. So we were able to close out that corrective action, and we are now looking forward to continuing to work with you guys on implementation and monitoring of that congestion management process. So just wanted to thank everyone for the hard work on that, and that is all that I have. Happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Any questions for Sean? Sean, I also want to thank you for working closely with me and helping me through the process. And I have enjoyed working with you all as well, and will enjoy continuing to work with you all while serving on the board. So thanks for all of your help. We will now move on to TDOT. Preston, are you going to take TDOT today?
I will, sure, thank you. Just a few couple of notes, and just as Sean mentioned, Mayor Reed, thank you for your leadership over this last year. Some challenging times, but a lot was achieved by your leadership, other members, and especially staff. One thing I wanted to point out, I think at last month's board meeting, there was a question about the sports wagering and whether those funds were somehow funneled their way to transportation. I talked to our chief financial officer, and unfortunately, that is not the case. We do not receive any funds from that particular legislation. I did find that funding goes 3 different ways. About 80% of it is distributed to the treasurer, and it goes into the general fund. And then about 15% is also back to the treasurer, and then is distributed to municipalities that go back to your general fund. And then 5% goes to the treasurer, and then ultimately for mental health. So that's my understanding of that particular piece of legislation. So while there's probably a lot of revenue being generated from it, unfortunately, nothing directly specifically back to transportation, at least at the department's level. I think I wanted to also mention, I think there was 1 or 2 other items. Something that, one of the items that Anna covered earlier on, which was, let me get my information back here. It was 4C. I noticed in your packet, and I think it's pretty important for all board members to look at, it's on page 19 of the PDF. It is a listing of all of the projects, the project tracking that staff pulled together. It shows the allocation of federal funds, the type of funding, the stage of what is funded. I think it's a really important table to look through. Your projects, your locally managed projects are on that list. It may give you an opportunity to talk to your staff to see where projects are in your communities. If you recall, the commissioner, has many times spoken about unobligated STBG dollars and the rising balance. This table, which starts on page 19 in your agenda, is what we're referring to. So it's a really important list of project information to look at. and to kind of help push and move within your communities. So I appreciate staff putting that in there. And I think Matt Meservey may have one comment or two for you as some updates.
Thanks, Preston, and Mayor Reed and board. Hello. I do want to echo my congratulations to the new chair and vice chair. I look forward to working with them in the future. Preston leaves me with some table scraps, but I think it is important. I wanted to update you on our urban transportation planning grant process. We have awarded the project in Nashville, in the Nashville MPO area, the Gallatin and Sumner County Active Transportation Plan. We are currently in negotiations with that consultant, and we plan to have a notice to proceed sometime in mid-April. So that's the update I wanted to give at this point. And thank you, Mayor Reed, for your time. I wish I could have worked longer with you, but as everybody has said, it's goodbye, but not forever.
Great, thanks, Matt. And Preston, any questions for TDOT? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the chair's report. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank each one of you that are that's on the board. I also want to thank staff. I cannot tell you how hard our staff works day in and day out. As a board member, I guess I didn't get to see it as much as I have in the role as chair, and there's no way I can thank them enough for all that they do. I also want to thank all the planning partners for your collaboration. I think we all know it's been a tough last year, but we managed to get through it, and I think it's made us all a stronger organization, and in the end, the ones who win are the citizens of the Middle Tennessee region. So I want to thank each one of you. I also want to thank my staff at the town of Smyrna. I cannot tell you how great they are, and there were so many times that I was working on things for this board, and they would pick up the slack for me. So to my team at the town of Smyrna, thank you as well. One thing I want to make sure that each one of you as board members understand is what a huge responsibility we all have as a board. It is our goal and our role as a transportation policy board to be the primary group for collaboration among our local communities and state government to develop a shared vision. A shared vision for transportation, and for us to identify and prioritize those projects that we feel need funding that will effectively move our vision forward. And the buck stops with us when it comes to transportation in the Middle Tennessee region. Sometimes I think we overlook that as board members, but I just want you to know how important the job is serving on this board and how important it is for those citizens within our communities for the vision we have for transportation and then making sure that vision is implemented. For those of you that have been on the board for a little while, you will remember in October of 2017, we integrated the MPO into the GNRC, and we studied that for over a year. And we brought in lots of people to speak with our board. We studied and studied and studied on the issue. And in October of 17, decided to integrate MPO into the Greater Nashville Regional Council. And while this might be unique here in Tennessee, what we learned over that time period was it really aligned us more with transportation planning for our region with what was being done in 70% of the nation's metropolitan areas of 1 million people or more. I've talked to you all a little bit about living in the bubble, and my town council hears it all the time, but none of us can live in a bubble. None of us can live only within the city limits of our own communities, nor can we live just within our counties or our region. And so I think what this helps us do is it helps us to make sure that we work as regional mayors through the regional council to coordinate economic development as well as investment in other aspects of infrastructure that is in sync with our transportation planning. And that is so important that transportation is not done just within a bubble either. And I want us to not forget that GNRC is so important for each one of us as local officials to build stronger partnerships with each other, as well as with state and federal agencies, because connections and relationship building is one of the key roles I see as officials that we have. And last but not least, I am stepping down as chair, but I am not going away. So I would like to say to Mayor Vogel and Mayor Mulder that I am happy to assist this board in any way that I can help contribute to continue to improve collaboration, especially with issues related to project delivery. And Preston, I totally agree about the what Anna talked about in regards to the slide that was put forth with all the projects. I think we definitely have to continue to collaborate on that and make sure those projects are moving forward. I will tell you, in the last 2 years, I have learned so much, more than probably I need to know about federal requirements and the TDOT process and the growing list of our regional needs. And I really feel that we have to make sure that we continue to be transparent and have open conversation among all of our partners, because that's what's going to continue to move us forward as a region and as our individual communities. With that, I just want to congratulate Mayor Vogel and Mayor Mulder. I know you guys are going to do a wonderful job, and you will continue to move this board forward as well as our region forward. And with that, Mayor Vogel, is there anything you'd like to add as the new chair?
Yes, Mayor Reed, I really like the bubble terminology because as a county commissioner for years, I didn't understand the GNRC. All I worried about was the Robinson County and the 7th District. But now that I've got to meet all of you over in Nashville, and I missed that so bad. That was one of the highlights of being a mayor, sitting around and talking to you and learning so much, and all the other mayors that, I mean, all of y'all are great folks, and it was just so neat. We're going to get back to that. This is going fast. But the bubble terminology is, you're exactly right. We're all in this looking out for north, south, east, and west, Nashville, Middle Tennessee all together. And I'm a little bit intimidated. Mayor Reed, you're a rock star, I found out, and back having to come behind you is going to be tough. But I'm planning on using your ear and all the other mayors, and I promise you, I'm not going to try to let anybody down. I'm going to be up front, and we all work in the same goal, because if we don't work together, we're just going to be going in different directions. But I appreciate your time so much, and I've learned a lot from you. And hey, you're going to be hard to replace. But I hope you're on every month, and we get to pick your ear and share your wisdom. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mayor Vogel. Mayor Vogel, I just want to tell you what a great group of mayors that you're going to have to work with, as well as great staff through GNRC, as well as our state and federal partners. I think you will find it all very enjoyable. With that, I will turn it over to Sean for the staff report.
Thank you, Mayor Reed. I know that we've got to transition over to the next meeting, but I just echo all of those comments about you. Staff's greatly appreciated all of your service and leadership. I think you've acquired so much knowledge, transportation planning knowledge, and it's apparent in all of the meetings that you chair. And we look forward to future ways, finding future opportunities for you to contribute, because you're such a great asset. The only thing I wanted to mention, we have a 2-day workshop coming up in April that we've scheduled with FHWA on safe transportation for every pedestrian. And this workshop will provide resources and technical assistance on some of the proven strategies for addressing pedestrian safety, which has become a rising problem within our region. And the workshop will be open to you, TPB members, TCC, as well as our Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee members. So look forward to your participation, and we'll be sending around an invite soon. And the only other item, Sean Santaya had already touched on this, the INFA grant. Excited about this opportunity. We're aware of at least 2 applications under development in our region, and look forward to successful submissions and hopefully awards in the future. But let us know if you have any questions or want to talk through a potential application. With that, Mike, I'll turn it over to you to transition us.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Good morning, everyone. Just to let you know, we do have GNRC Executive Board firing up here. We're a little bit late today. The link to get to that meeting is posted in the chat, but it's gnrc.org/meetings/online-xb there in the chat. Also on the website, a quick preview of the agenda. We do have an important action item on the agenda for the Executive Board today, which is an endorsement of an annual update to the region's area plan for programs on aging and disability services. That not only is an important action item, but I think we're going to be bringing to you some really good information about the work that we do together as a region to support quality of life for older adults. And then we have a really important informational item on the agenda related to the government affairs activities coordinated by GNRC through the Middle Tennessee Mayor's Caucus. So you won't want to miss either one of those agenda items, and we'll see you over at the Executive Board here momentarily.
Thanks, Michael. Sean, anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Great. Well, the next board meeting is April the 21st, and hopefully soon we'll be able to start meeting in person when we feel that it is safe for everyone. But if there is nothing else to come before this board, then we are adjourned.